Hello, YouTubers, and I'm just showing my gradual collection of historic U.S. flags from relatively the beginning of the country, and I'm trying to collect the flags over time from when they added the stars during the different eras and periods, of the existence of the United States, post-revolution and pre-revolution, of course. And this one is pre-revolution, and I'm going to break it up in multiple parts, and I got a couple more coming later, and you'll see that. So one thing that I've been fanatical about growing up, I was horrible in math. I had to burn the midnight oil on that, but in history class and also government class when I was in high school in Virginia, I felt like I was a genius because I always loved learning, the Learning Channel, and TLC. What's that other one? Discovery. Growing up, I love historic, epic periods. George Washington, the founding fathers, of course. The part of Virginia I was in. Newport News. That's where the 13 colonies started. That's where a lot of the revolution started. The old battlefield of Yorktown. And this is what would become the United States in its still colonial period. So there's the Union Jack in the corner to emphasize its jurisdiction, under Daddy Britain, Great Britain. And, of course, what else happened if you're familiar with U.S. history, what eventually happened. Again, colonial period. So when you go to colonial Williamsburg, especially the early part of the country, especially in the eastern seaboard, even a lot of the colloquialisms of British culture and English tradition, it was still it was still heavily culturally English or Scottish or whatever. People from the British Isles came over, just like the hillbillies that people like to laugh at, like Appalachia and such. Yeah, they were Scotch-Irish. They were, renegades. Even our founding fathers, really culturally, in their mannerisms and the way they spoke, they were pretty much like Englishmen that just, cut the line to Father Britain. So they still had those aspects. So American culture as we know it today took a while to develop. And then post-revolution or revolution flag, this is my favorite design of the 13 colonies. And it's supposed to represent the 13 states, the 13 colonies that became the 13 states. So I like this design. It's just iconic, especially when they had the centennial in the mid-70s and such, and every 4th of July. I like seeing this. I mean, this is, again, just a beautiful, simple design. This is the Betsy Ross, so, if any of you want to get something like this to, display in the man cave or your study, you have a hunting lodge, yeah, this definitely looks great. I mean, this is the same amount of stars. This is not the Betsy Ross. It's just the standard Stars on the Field design. The 13 colonies. 3, 6, 9, and then 4. Yeah, 13 colonies. Well, then, just the 13 states. So, the template was getting started, and then, before Western expansionism started pushing further and further west, the United States as we knew it back then was pretty much that whole eastern seaboard area. So this is, again, the same amount of stars, just a standard line-by-line design. And before I go to part 2, I'm going to do one more. This is the 15-star flag. So back then in, from 1795 and 1818, Vermont and Kentucky were added to the Union. And I believe Vermont was officially part of New York, but they separated, kind of like Virginia and West Virginia before the split. So, and Vermont is definitely a distinct New England culture, very famous for syrup. And Kentucky, just a border away from the state I used to live in, Virginia. And when Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner during the War of 1812, when the British were trying to get a foothold in, he was a prisoner, and at that time, this was the flag that inspired the Star-Spangled Banner. Again, "Oh say can you see by the dawn's early light," and so the 15 star configuration was what was current at that time, the War of 1812, and the British tried to get a foothold back into the continental U.S. and failed miserably and were sent packing. So that is a 15 star, and that was, that flag flew officially from 1795 until 1818. All right, and I'm going to cut it off here because I don't want to bore you to death. Over and out.